How to cut the cancer out, do it yesterday and rip it off like a band-aid. You're going to have to, but the sooner you cut it out, the sooner you start rebuilding if we're saying it's a cancer. How to recognize the cancer? Your scorecards, your KPIs, your one-on-one, your pulse.
Great experiences build great leaders. Great leaders build great teams. This is Building Great Sales Teams.
All right, guys, welcome back to Building Great Sales Teams. I want to do a solo episode for you guys today. We had a question in our win rate coaching group, and it was a really good question. And I wanted to expand on my answer basically for the group, for you guys today in this episode. So I think we're going to title this episode "How to Cut Out the Cancer," is what I'm thinking. How to cut out the cancer, right? So when you're looking at sales organizations, sales centric companies, the cancer is typically the person bringing down the rest of the team. Now, I just want to kind of classify a few different types of cancers, right? And so you've got the one that you recognize early. They got an attitude, they got a problem, maybe they're a little ghetto or whatever the case is. And they're not really up to your company standards. Those are easy. You cut them out early. Those aren't a big deal, but you have to have standards in the first place. You have to have a purpose and a mission and know your values, know exactly where you're going and what kind of people you want in the company. And if your values are not executed across the company, if they're not constantly on top of your team members' mind, it is going to be hard for them to decipher what someone that isn't meeting the standards looks like, or acts like, or talks like, or works like. So make sure, first and foremost, that you have a line, right? You have a minimum that you're willing to accept in terms of behavior, in terms of work ethic, in terms of systems and processes, in terms of controllable actions and performance. You've got to have a filter to run all that through, right? So now that we got that out of the way, let's assume that you do. There's a few types of cancers that are going to come into your company. The one is the entry level one, again, easy to sniff out and get out of the company early. I think we all understand, and maybe I'm being maybe I'm being out of, how do I say this? Like I'm around a lot of high performing people and businesses and leaders a lot. So when I say cancer, they immediately think to the cancers they've had in their past. But if I'm speaking to a less experienced business owner or sales leader, then I guess the way I would explain it is very much like real cancer, right? Takes over your body, starts eating away at the body, right? In this case, the business, and ends up lowering the standard of everybody involved, ends up as a distraction, ends up as a hindrance to your forward progress and hindrance to your values and your mission and your purpose. Okay. So now that we've established what a cancer is, and we've walked through one of the different types, well, the second one is that high performing salesperson. Okay. A high performing salesperson can be a cancer. And I know this sounds counterintuitive. If they're high performing, how are they a cancer? Well, they may be high performing, but they're performing without values intact. They're telling white lies to customers. They're pressuring customers to close the deal. These are the high pressure sales. A lot of times, your cancers come to your company in the form of all the experience, setting all the records, coming from other companies. And this is my first kind of like, "Hey, I need to watch this person." They're coming in saying that they were the greatest thing since sliced bread at their other company. Already, they're kind of too about themselves. You know those, and you think in sales in general, especially in sales orgs like or sales centric companies like solar, roofing, um, pest control. You got to have a little cockiness to you. You got to have a little swagger, right? And I can appreciate that. Don't get me wrong, but there's swagger for swagger's purpose, and then there's swagger for a purpose, right? There's swagger to say you have swagger and to have a chip on your shoulder and an attitude, and then there's swagger like, hey, I've got a mission and a purpose, and nothing's gonna stop me from getting it. That's the kind of confidence I want, right? And so a lot of these guys come in with experience, and they come in with entitlements. Is a great word, and probably one that we're going to use a lot in this conversation. And so entitlements, I've been dealing with entitlement since I hired my first salesperson. There is an entitlement, and this increases with every generation if you're not recruiting the right people. Sometimes your recruiting process is your filter. If you're lucky, you've built such a strong culture, reputation, and values that people know coming in, they don't even bother applying because they know you're going to flush them out. They know you won't put up with that crap. Now, this is rare. This is completely rare because most people think that they have values. Most people think that they have minimum standards and that they have a good moral compass, not knowing that when it comes to making a dollar, all that goes out the window, right? So these people come in with experience and entitlement, and again, every generation it gets a little more diluted, right? Um, and so that's something that I've always had to deal with. But just because they come in entitled doesn't mean that they can't be a good salesperson. At the end of the day, you need to set the minimum standard, and they need to adhere to the minimum standard, which is controllable actions, which is attitude in the office, you know what I mean? Which is, sometimes it's the way you dress, sometimes it's the way you act in the office. Look, I can tell you right now that smoking weed is one of the first red flags that I have. If you come into my office and you cannot for one day stop smoking, that's going to be a red flag. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people that I respect that are my friends that are operating, they are able to operate, you know, 5 times better than most people that are sober. You know what I'm saying? So don't get me wrong, but this is not the general population. This is not most of the sales reps that are coming in your company. And let's be honest, if they can't stop smoking for one day to do an interview with you, if they can't stop smoking long enough to conduct their business and earn money and prove themselves, then they're probably not good for you. They're probably their real master is that drug. Their real master is the culture. You know what I'm saying? Their real master is looking cool. Their real master is womanizing. You know what I'm saying? And so, and I've been all those things have been my master before. You know what I mean? So I'm not above any of it. What I'm telling you guys, these are red flags that you need to watch. And if you get a red flag in combination with the inability to meet the minimum standards, then there's no question, cut them loose. All right. It's a combination of these variables that are involved that are really going to tell you, hey, I need to cut this person loose. All right. So going back to the experienced reps, another thing that they'll bring over besides entitlements is bad habits, right? And when I say bad habits, I mean not doing the controllable actions, having a high close rate. A lot of guys with high close rates will not do the controllable actions, right? So they won't ask for referrals. They won't get testimonials submitted. They won't follow up with customers because if they can't close them then and there, they're going to move on to the next customer and try to close them there, right? Or they were part of a company that allowed them to do nothing but sell and close, which isn't always a bad thing, right? Again, lots of variables involved, but you got to have more abilities than to just close a deal. You got to be able to follow up. You got to be able to create an amazing customer experience. You got to be able to have emotional maturity when things go sideways. You got to be able to put out fires. You know what I mean? Those are the best salespeople and sales managers in the world have that ability. And that's why they're around long term. And that's why they don't have to hop company to company. And you better be able to toe the company line. That is a skill. At the end of the day, the company is not just paying you for commission. And here's the problem with 1099 W 2. At the end of the day, if I were to start over, and this is where I was going in my sales org, but my partner at the time didn't believe in this. This is where I was going in my sales org was W 2. If I had to start over and I was building a sales team again, it would 100% be W 2. And I would have the financials in order to do that. You know what I'm saying? Or I'm not going to do it. I need runway to invest in my W 2 people. That's the problem with most sales works is we don't have the runway to invest in those W-2 people because it's commission sales, it's performance-based sales. Nobody's paying us if we don't make a sale, but we still gotta pay them. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why recurring revenue comes into play and all these things, but I don't wanna go down that rabbit hole. Refocus. So going back, and they're gonna bring the bad habits, right? So you wanna make sure that you're able to purge them of those. Again, if you have an established values, established scorecard, established minimum standards, was I've talked to you guys about in the past, then you're able to check them with that. And if they cannot adhere to that, which again, this is the scorecard, these are the KPIs that we expect from you, these are the controllable actions, these are the conversion rates, and this is the performance, the amount of closes, the amount of sales that we expect from you in this time frame. Once you establish that, it becomes a filter for your cancers. So if somebody has a bad attitude, okay, maybe we can work on that. Maybe we'll take the time to work on that. But if somebody has a bad attitude and they're not doing the controllable actions and they're not getting the results, well, that's easy. Now, there's a three-factor process there. If somebody has a bad attitude and they're getting the results, but they're not doing the controllable actions, well, chances are there's exceptions to the rule, but chances are they are cutting corners somewhere in order to get those results. 13 years of managing salespeople directly. Chances are they are cutting corners somewhere. And so you recognize the red flags in that they have a bad attitude. They won't toe the company line. They won't do the controllable actions. It's always about what's in it for me. You recognize those red flags, but they're getting the results. They're bringing in the results. They're showing the rest of the team what's possible. Yeah, they're showing the rest of the team what's possible when you don't do anything that the sales program recommends. You know what I'm saying? What I would much rather have is somebody that follows the sales program, that follows the controllable actions, that has a good attitude, that is about our values and performs. And if you have a solid sales program, that's going to happen, right? So recognizing the cancers is huge. These are again those top performers, the people that came over from other companies. Maybe you even grew them in your company. Now they've gotten entitled. They've been a top performer for 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever the case is. Right around the 6 month mark of somebody being a top performer from starting from zero, they get a big head and they start believing that it's them that is the reason for their success and not a combination of them, the company, their environment, their situation, what I'm saying, their influences. We are such a small part of our success. It's our decisions with what we do with those influences, the people around us, the systems we're given, the processes we're given, the sales program that we follow. It's our decision to act on that and execute on that that is really the reason for our success, right? None of my success has come from an original thought. All of my success has come from daily disciplines and systems and processes. 100%. Okay. So we've talked about the entry level cancer. We've talked about the cancer, the top salesperson in the company. And okay, how do we check that cancer? We check it with KPIs and scorecards. And we check it with real things that we can see, data that we can pull and that we can show them. And when we show them, are we met with excuses and BS and it's not me? Or are we met with accountability and responsibility? And then are we met with action to correct it? Because the ones that take action to correct it, even if it's for a little bit of time, those typically aren't the cancers, at least initially, right? So execute on getting rid of the cancers at that level. Now let's talk about the most important level, which this happens in all companies. It doesn't matter how good your sales program is, how good your qualification metrics are. None of it matters if they've been promoted through the system and something happened along the way. And this always happens with leadership. So they've gone from salesperson to maybe they went from salesperson straight to sales manager. That was the case in the client that I was speaking to and that asked the question. So there was no in between. You know what I'm saying? There was no having to build a team You just got promoted to sales manager and you got handed a team. Think about it. Like, did you recruit those people in individually? Sure, you trained them, but training is just 1/10 of what it takes to build a team. So you may have trained them, but did you actually have to go out and recruit that team and go through the recruiting process and do the interviews and do the filtering? Did you place the ads? Did all these things that go into recruiting great sales teams? They didn't have to do, right? They didn't have to go through that heartache of losing someone, because all they've done at that point is sell really well. So now they've been promoted to sales manager. Now they're over a team that they've been handed, so that's typically where the entitlement comes in because they were just handed to 'em, and then they don't appreciate each individual team member because they didn't have to sacrifice in order to keep them on long term, as well as invest in them to get them trained and to get them developed, and the time and the energy that maybe the business owner did, right? And so in that case, where they go from salesperson to manager to where they're the boss of the sales division, you've already kind of have built-in entitlement. It's the same as raising kids. If you just hand it to them, they're not going to appreciate it. They're not going to covet it like they should. Okay. So in this case, manager goes on vacation, and then owner has to step in for a week and realizes everything's falling apart. The curtain's kind of pulled back, and you can see that the systems and processes aren't being necessarily followed. The KPIs aren't on point, all of this stuff. So his whole thing was, well, how do I make sure in the future that I have a pulse on these things? Okay. Because the pulse is going to be the filter to recognize the cancers. You know what I'm saying? And so cancer is such a rough word. It's a convicting word because once you say it, once you label somebody that, typically it means they've already displayed that pattern over time. And if they hear it, well, then the relationship's over. I mean, think about it. Cancer just destroys lives, at least the lives on this earth, you know? And so if we're calling someone that, it's already gone too far. But in this case, in this question, he wasn't calling him that. He was just like, how did I let it? He took ownership, as good business owners do. He took ownership. It's like, hey, how do I prevent this in the future and make sure that he's on his P's and Q's? And his question was kind of followed up with, I feel like the business owners that has to always be on morning, noon, and night. I got to be all over on top of everything. And so my immediate answer was, no, you don't. Right? No, you don't. You should be able to work off of a scorecard, a weekly meeting that you're having. And the KPIs give you indicators, red or green, whether that sales manager is doing well or not. No external factors really matter. It's a score. It is. It's a scorecard on his sales management. And based on those quarterly targets and reverse engineered into a scorecard, right? And so that's your first indicator. All right, your second indicator is going to be your one-on-ones. One-on-ones are huge. I talk about these a lot. You need to be touching base with your individual sales reps. Now, depending on the size of the organization, if you're a 50 to 100 person organization like I was in the past, this is more of a quarterly thing. Or this is more of a when it's convenient and I'm there in person type thing, and I can knock out, 4 or 5 conversations in an hour because I'm physically there. But one-on-one should be happening. If you have a 5 person sales team, well, that's easy. You can have one conversation every 5 weeks. It's one call every 5 weeks. And you're having a one-on-one conversation with every one of your sales reps every 5 weeks. So that's a good pulse too. The weekly scorecard is a good pulse, but the best pulse is going to be your conversations with that sales manager. So if you don't have a one-on-one meeting with that sales manager on a weekly basis, you need to have a one-on-one conversation with them. And that conversation needs to be very much a check-in. How are you doing personally? How are you doing professionally? Are there any issues that we need to discuss? And then that's when you bring in the KPIs, like, hey, this KPI has been a constant issue for us. We talked about it in different meetings and all hands meetings. And now it's become a long-term issue. How do we address this? How do we workshop this? And so we create 3 points of pulse where you're checking the pulse of your company or you're checking the pulse of the sales org. And so the cancer, if it is one, is going to rear its ugly head because you'll notice the solutions not being executed. You'll notice the KPIs not being hit. You'll notice the procedures not being followed. And you'll know, okay, I've got a problem here. These are all these are all decisions being made not to do the thing that we've agreed to do or that I've put in place to do. And so that's how you recognize the cancer at the sales management level. And so now the question is, all right, do I just cut them loose and promote somebody else? What do I do? I have to be the sales manager again, and you know that is the first answer that I would recommend, right? Because if you're calling them a cancer already, it's you know they say the moment you should fire someone is when you first considered firing them. That's the moment you should do it, and most people don't. But I get it. All the variables are different. So let me give you a few scenarios. Scenario one, you fire them right away. But now instead of promoting somebody else to sales manager, you promote them to trainer or team lead or assistant manager, whatever title you want to give. Okay. Now this person starts building a team. They're part of the recruiting process. They're part of the opportunity meetings or the interviews, whatever the case is. This person now takes stock and ownership in everybody that they bring onto their team and they individually train. So part of the thing that we recognize with this sales manager that this client had is that that sales manager was training. There was no in between. It was salesperson and sales manager. Now, depending on how many salespeople you have, I would venture to say if you have more than 5 or 10 salespeople, you need an assistant manager. 5 to 1, most people can manage. You know what I'm saying? Think about it. If you're a business owner, you've got VP of sales or a sales manager, you've got somebody on the ops side, if you got somebody on the marketing side. So you're managing 3 or 4 now, which is why you can't manage the sales assistant manager or the sales lead or the sales trainer. You can't manage that level, but you can check in with them every now and then, you know? And then there is, of course, the sales rep. So if you get to 5, all right, that's where I would have an assistant manager or a team lead. Basically, they're going to be the ones training everybody. They're going to be ones out in the field. They are a in-field manager. They're a field general, as we call them in door to door. They're a field general. And so then we're getting into, okay, when do I promote a manager? You promote a manager around 10 to 15. 10, they can typically handle 3 or 4 of their own, and then they have another assistant manager handling 5 or 6. Then you get up to 15. Now we need 2 assistant managers, you know? And yes, it's very MLM-ish, but this is how every corporate structure works. You guys know this, right? But you need that in between because once you get to a sales manager, you start managing 15 people. In this case, it was roofing. So it's like, oh, now I'm not just managing 15 people, I'm managing, you know, 30 jobs a month or something like that, making sure that they get pushed through, making sure we're hitting our conversion rates, making sure that we're following up and doing everything that we should do on that. So this question created a lot of variables and solutions that could be executed on. It just matters who's in the driver's seat and what decision that they want to make based on everything that's in front of them. This is the hardest part about consulting and coaching is you can't make the decision for them. With consulting, building out a sales program, yeah, for the most part, I build the docs, I build the system. But at the end of the day, it's up to them to execute it. And it's up to them to filter it for their company and the way they do business, or else it won't work. You can't just plug something into an existing culture without going through a filter first. And so, how to cut the cancer out? Um, do it yesterday and rip it off like a band-aid. You're gonna have to, but the sooner you cut it out, the sooner you start rebuilding. If we're saying it's a cancer, how to recognize the cancer? Your scorecards, your KPIs, your one-on-one, your pulse, and then yeah, just instinct, your gut instinct into who they are. And that's gonna come from experience too. I can tell you with a lot of my clients, I have pegged people from the beginning, judged them from day one of coming into the company and having a conversation with them and said, "Oh, I know you. I've seen you a few times. Hell, I've seen you 20 times. You're not going to work out." Do I do anything about it? No. I let the system take care of it. itself, or I make sure that there's a system in place to take care of that person when they inevitably don't complete controllable action, or when they inevitably lash out in terms of attitude and unprofessionalism because they don't have the emotional maturity, because I can tell just in the conversation that we've had. And it's typically the entitled ones. If somebody displays entitlement, that person long term is going to be a cancer. And it's typically the ones that were born with sales talent and sales skills, that the ones that were born with communication skills and the ability to talk to people and to loosen them up and get that wall down. You can be born with those things. But the ones that are taught those things and have to work for them appreciate them so much more, and they don't take them lightly. They appreciate the people that train them to do it too as well. And those are the ones that you can build a company. The steady eddies are my favorite. Not the ace in the holes, not the flash in a pan success. You guys know this if you listened to my podcast for a while. And so that's how you do it. You got to have systems in place to recognize it in the first place. You got to know your avatars of when the cancers show up. And then you got to make sure that you make the hard decision of cutting it out when you need to. You know, one of the things that I love about sales centric companies or sales orgs is that typically the owner started from the bottom. So he knows that if everything hits the fan, he could do it all again someday. You know, if everything hits the fan for me, if you guys stop listening to me and you stop, hiring me to consult for you, hire me as a fractional CSO or fractional integrator, you guys stop coming to my events or supporting me on social media, it doesn't fucking matter. I love doing this. I have purpose in this, but I have a skill set beyond all that that means my family will never go hungry. And it's sales, baby. Let's get building.